Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force. I'm your host, Sarah.
And I'm your host, Brad.
And on today's episode, we are bringing you an interview that we had such a lovely time recording with Dr. Chris Kempshall, who earlier this year came out with The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire from DK Books.
Yes, Sarah, I can say you and we love Star Wars politic, don't we?
We do. It's true. It's one of my favorite things. And so when I heard that we were getting a book from a historian who has written on the history and politics, this is his other title, guys, surprise, the history and politics of Star Wars, Death Stars and Democracy, I was like, they did this for me. He's doing this for me. And so to have this in universe history of the Empire was such a delight. And it took us some time to get through this book. It took us some time to marinate in this book, to bring you this conversation. But we are so glad that we get to do it now.
Yeah, I would say this is probably one of my top Star Wars books that I now own. I feel like it's the perfect encapsulation of all the different eras of Star Wars and all the eras that the Empire has risen and fallen and risen again, only to fall a second time.
That's kind of how it works.
But for some really good context for our interview, so this book, as Sarah mentioned, is in universe. It's from the perspective of Beaumont Kin, who is Dominic Monaghan's character in The Rise of Skywalker. So he is an in-universe historian. He is telling the rise and fall of the Empire through his eyes, what limited information is available to him. So that's what really made this book unique in terms of that kind of fact-finding, fact-gathering exercise to kind of put all the puzzle pieces together across the Republic, across the Empire, across the rise of the Resistance and the First Order. So I cannot highly recommend this book enough. It is honestly like I would say a must own for any Star Wars fan. It reads like a history book, but it reads in such a way that like you can't put it down and you just want to like keep uncovering the history with Beaumont.
And before we jump into the interview, I just want to give you a little bit more context on Chris's work because it is helpful as we have this conversation with him and you understand his expertise a little bit better. So he is a historian who specializes in the First World War. He's written a couple of academic texts on the First World War and then, of course, kind of brought that together, his historical expertise with Star Wars in the history and politics of Star Wars. Then he kind of got into Star Wars publishing with Battles That Changed the Galaxy, which was co-authored with Jason Fry, Cole Horton, and Amy Ratcliffe, which came out from DK in 2021. And now we get this book. So that's a little bit of the progression of how we got here. He is super knowledgeable, not just about Star Wars, of course, but about history, warfare, Empire and European history. And so I think that he is the perfect person to write this book and to talk about our current moment of Star Wars and our current moment in the world kind of in a broader sense with. So we're really, really honored that we got to talk with him about this book. And we hope that you either have read the book and enjoyed it as much as we did, or will want to pick it up after this conversation. So, without further ado, let's jump into our conversation with Dr. Chris Kempshall.
Chris, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. We're so thrilled to have you here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this, and actually because, like, you know, it's been a while since the book come out, and that'll come up shortly. And you know, for the first couple of like 2 or 3 weeks, I was doing quite a lot of kind of various different interviews and bits and pieces. So you get like the refreshed version of me, who has had time to heal and kind of regenerate, which hopefully will lead to like actual joined up sentences and real words that humans use.
Hey, but no judgment either way, partial sentences, that's fine. Just clauses, whatever,
Yeah,
it all works.
We're getting the George Lucas special edition interview with Chris Kempshall where it came out after, but a lot of great bits that were added, some refined areas. So we're getting the good stuff here.
Yeah, ET's just going to randomly wander across the screen.
And we love that, That's the best part.
But Chris, thank you again for joining us. I know the book has been out for a couple of months. So first question to start is just now that you've had time to, you've done some interviews, It's been out for a couple of months. People have had time to really dive in and pick this thing apart. What has it been like to see the fan appraise of this book and to have this out on shelves?
It's been, I mean, it's been overwhelmingly really, really nice. So there's when you're doing a thing like this, because I was working on this book for a year leading up to over a year leading up to release. So it just belonged to me, and I occasionally shared it with Lucasfilm and my editor at DK, and then like I had to submit it, and they printed it, and people were going to like hold it with their hands and look at it with their eyeballs, and I didn't know how I felt about that. I didn't write this so that other people could read it, that it was going to end up on bookshelves and stuff like that. But it's been really nice. We hoped that it would be well received and it would land, but there's no given with it. You never really know what's gonna happen. But we felt like there was a sweet spot within the audience who were gonna eat it up. And that's been nice to see that they've been getting a kick out of it. Occasionally, I don't join in with them, but occasionally, depending on whichever of like the million social media platforms that now exist, the algorithm will just cough up people talking about the book. They're not tagging me in it or anything, and it's just it feels a little bit like spying, which is odd, but it's quite nice to just see people talking about it and enjoying it. And the day that it came out in the UK, I went into London because there aren't any bookshops nearby where I live, just to wander around some bookshops in London to kind of like see it on the shelf and point at it and take some photos. I didn't do anything other than that. It was just a little day for me to go and be like, there it is. It exists. We did it.
And it's beautiful too. First off, it's a chunky book.
It's a chunky
Second
book.
off, incredible cover with the dusting of the Imperial logo. I mean,
they did a beautiful job with it.
This is probably one of my top 5 owned Star Wars books at this point, not only for like the look and feel of it, but the cover and just the amount of work that you put into this thing is just incredible. And I love the like in-universe political storytelling. It's just so good. So good.
With the front cover, me and David Fenterman at DK both basically had the same idea for what we wanted the front cover to be. Either like an eroding Imperial symbol, or I don't know if your listeners won't be able to see this. I'm holding up a small bust of Emperor Palpatine, of like that type of statue crumbling effect. And we both had exactly the same image in our mind. And clearly he kind of passed it on to the cover designer who, it's beautiful. They just did an amazing job. It's like, yeah, that's what I wanted. But it's actually better than what I wanted.
It's like, it's so, the cover is so simple.
Yeah.
But it's so poignant. It does exactly what it needs to do with that image. And yeah, obsessed. Absolutely obsessed.
In a moment of like massive self-indulgence, in the lead up to it coming out, I had the front cover printed on a mouse mat. That I could have it by my computer, but also I needed a new mouse mat, and I was like, you know what? That'll be it. that's gonna do it.
You know what? I think that should be the goal. It's not necessarily like going to see your book on the bookshelf. It's just like getting one single custom printed, very specific item that you can have forever.
Yes.
With the cover. Like that's perfect. I'm going to jump around just a little bit here. Since we're talking about the book and you're talking about all this incredible work you've done on this book is rooted in and is told kind of with the framework of a history rather than a narrative, fiction story. And that was so exciting for me in particular, because I am one of those girlies that, the High Republic, Comac Vetus, and all the papers that he's written. I was like, when do I get to read one of those?
Yeah.
When do I get to read one of those?
No rush. End of the week will be fine, guys. But, come on.
Right. And so when I heard about this book, I was so excited and delighted. And you were the perfect person to do this book and to write this book with your background. And so I would love to know more about what brought you to, the field of history and to being a historian.
So I'm gonna give you the answer, and I'm not. I will say you have to promise not to laugh, but you're going to break that promise. So the reason why I'm a historian is that I realised that I wasn't going to be a soccer commentator.
That's so
what
valid,
I wanted,
though.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I wanted to be when I was doing like secondary school, which is the high school equivalent, and I studied media studies. I dropped history quite early on. I didn't study history properly at all at kind of university over here, college over there. But then, because I was studying media studies and the like, and then realised that it's not going to happen, Chris. You're probably not going to be a soccer commentator. They don't need that many. Whilst there are a reasonable number of soccer football gamers on every week, at the same time, it just isn't going to happen. So I panicked. And I decided to stay at university for a while and do a kind of a war studies and international relations masters, and from there kind of segued onwards into history in the First World War, and then just kind of stayed there because the irony of going, okay, there aren't enough jobs as a soccer commentator. The next obvious sector for you to get long-term employment in is a historian at a university,
right?
Because you can't walk down the street without somebody offering you a job in one of those things. So that was kind of the routine, and I found, because my PhD and a lot of my work kind of leading up to now has been about the First World War, as something that I just find kind of endlessly interesting, and just wanted more, wanted to read more, wanted to write more, wanted to know more, and then kind of reached the point where I don't really know I don't know how to do anything else. This is the only thing I know how to do kind of bits of history and writing, whilst at the same time effectively turning all of my geeky passions into work, which is both great because what are you doing this evening, Chris? I'm going to watch a Star Wars thing and call it work, and then I'm going to play a Star Wars game and call it work, and then I'm going to write some Star Wars words and call it work. That's pretty good. But at the same time, you end up analysing everything you love, which is less fun at times, depending on kind of, because sometimes I just want to sit down and watch Star Wars without being like that little academic voice on the corner of your shoulder going, oh, this is really interesting, you should write about this, or you should shut up and just let me watch Star Wars.
Yep.
So that's kind of been my historian journey. Once I'd kind of done stuff about the First World War, I then moved into kind of the portrayal of history in computer games, which was something that I've been working on for, I don't know, about 10 years or so as well. And then I jumped from there to another kind of academic book about the portrayal of real-world history and politics in the Star Wars franchise. And it was whilst I was kind of working on researching that book that I landed on kind of DK's radar. And they were like, do you want to maybe do a Star War with us? I was like, I would really like to do a Star War with you, please.
that would be.
We hope it's not the last Star War that you do as well. I know there's a lot of different histories that you could probably dive into through Star Wars, and that's the fascinating thing about it. It's just this giant tapestry, and here you are kind of taking your first steps into a larger world of the rise and fall of the Empire.
Yeah, and the thing that we know about Star Wars, but we don't really think about Star Wars, is that it all happened in the past. Literally the first thing you see about Star Wars is this happened a long time ago. So it's all history, and therefore it's all ripe for analysis or writing about in some way.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is that it's so rooted in George's understanding of the politics around him at the time, is that there's so many connections to pull and real world lessons to learn throughout watching Star Wars, even if we don't always think about it like that.
Yeah,
those things are always there, which makes them fun when we shine a light on them and
yes.
Really focus on them. We could talk a lot about the myth. We can talk a lot about the mythic structure and these sorts of elements of Star Wars, but we can also spend a lot of time in politics and real world influence and all these things.
Because it's in the DNA.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. We'd love to like bring it into the Star Wars lens a little bit, bring it into Star Wars, and we want to know more about your history with Star Wars. When did Star Wars come into your life? And turning all your hobbies into work. Yeah. What about all that?
So I don't remember a time when I didn't know that Star Wars existed. So we recorded the original trilogy, but not The Empire Strikes Back for some reason. And I have no recollection of not knowing that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father. I never got my Darth Vader, I am your father moment. I have no memory of never knowing that. But we recorded A New Hope and Return of the Jedi off of the TV on VHS cassette cassettes. But they used to play around like Christmas. So now when I watch Star Wars on like Disney Plus, I find it a very weird experience because I'm expecting there to be ad breaks, for like there to be a moment of dramatic tension, and then it cut to like, do you want to buy a sofa in our Christmas sale? It's like, no, 1980s salesman, I already have a sofa, and I think you're dead. But so I had that kind of. It's only on like the third question. I've already ruined the podcast.
No.
Nope, we are super unhinged here, so you're in good company.
So I always had those, like the an awareness of the films, and I watched those VHS a lot, and played a lot of like Super Star Wars on like the SNES and the Game Boy and the like. But I probably then got massively into Star Wars, probably around 1997. Ish, because I was in Florida on holiday, and at Disneyland they've got Downtown Disney in Florida, and there used to be an enormous Virgin Megastore there. It was like 5 stories tall, and on like the second floor was science fiction books. And I remember walking in there one day on holiday. I was like, I needed to get my next book, and seeing Timothy Zahn's Spectre of the Past, a book which I absolutely adore, and I bought it and I ate it in about a day or two, and then waited for felt like a million years for Vision of the Future to come out in the UK, because I think it took quite a lot longer to come out in the UK than it did in the US. And from there, I just ate the expanded universe, the old legends, and the like, and kind of fully dived back into it. And it was also a kind of a good period for computer games about Star Wars as well. So it effectively then kind of rose up to become like 8/10 of my personality from then onwards. And then it never really went away. So I kept reading the expanded universe and the legends, and obviously the prequels came out, and I watched all of those. And then in the early 2000s, a game called Star Wars Galaxies came out, which was an online game which I absolutely loved, and I'm still absolutely heartbroken doesn't exist properly anymore. And I wrote a lot of fan fiction while I was playing Star Wars Galaxies. And yeah, that was kind of a formative thing for me. So whilst I can say that, if I hadn't done like the history PhD, and, if I hadn't been doing this and that, and I wouldn't have done the sort of stuff, if I hadn't played Star Wars Galaxies and stuff like that, and kind of done the fan fiction and thinking about Star Wars in different ways, then this book wouldn't have happened either. And I wouldn't have been sat around, and DK would never have come to me. They wouldn't have asked me for any of this. So yeah, it's been a huge ongoing thing through my life. But it's only kind of now that kind of I can look back on it and think, actually, some of this stuff was unbelievably important in everything that's happened since. And it didn't feel like it at the time. There was no reason to think that it would be at the time. I was just reading Star Wars books and playing Star Wars games. But regardless of what friends and family may have said, it was time well spent. It was not just wasted time being ridiculous and geeky.
Yeah, there's no better feeling than, like, again, your hobby or fan interests turning into, full-time employment and job opportunities. And, I think it's so cool that for you going to a Virgin Megastore in downtown Disney and reading a Timothy Zahn book, books and video games. I think of Shadows of the Empire in the late 90s, like books and video games keeping the franchise alive for so long, in between the prequels and in between the prequels and the sequel trilogy. The fact that video games and books are still very prevalent for Star Wars too. Like, they've continued to live on and be such a core thing to the franchise. It has never been a substitute. It's always been something that's complementary to now what is coming out on TV and in movies. And so for you now to get to write a book that is again, like this history, it's not necessarily I'm going to tell you as Dr. Chris Kempshall what happens in Star Wars. I'm going to tell you of Beaumont Kin what I know and what I can pull from within my own universe. So to that end, Beaumont Kin, a character that we get introduced to in The Rise of Skywalker, like what do you think makes him the right choice to center the history of the Galactic Empire and eventually the First Order?
So when I had the idea for Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, which was maybe like late 2020, I think was probably around the time that I first got contacted to do Battles That Changed the Galaxy, and that's when I had the idea when I first kind of floated it with David Finterman. I knew that firstly it needed an in-universe historian, and it needed to be set, to my mind, in the immediate aftermath of The Rise of Skywalker, because it needed to have that kind of revisionist element of this isn't just a history, this is actually, we need to reconsider everything because of this awful, awful thing that's just happened to us, on top of all of the previous awful, awful things. And when you watch The Rise of Skywalker and Beaumont Kin's there, and he's clearly acting as like exposition a little bit, but it doesn't make, it doesn't flash up Dr. Beaumont Kin, historian, as like subtitles underneath. But when it became clear through kind of the accompanying text that that's what he was, that he was a historian, I knew that okay, you're my man, you're my guy for this, because firstly, once it's established that there's a historian character, you don't have to explain why they're acting like a historian. Like if Finn had sat down to write this book and said, okay, now let me talk you through my methodology and my footnotes, everybody would be like, really? is that what you've been doing in between all the stuff that's been going on? You've been given a crash course in historiography, have you, Finn?
Right.
And it just wouldn't, it would feel weird, it would feel out of place. But with a character who's already a historian, even if lots of the audience don't know that he's a historian, it provided a legitimacy for everything that I wanted to do. And it was important to me, firstly, to have someone who could act within the kind of the sphere of academic study, using footnotes, talking and writing in these ways, approaching things in these ways in a way that felt natural for them. But it also had to be a character who'd just been through the awful thing of the sequel trilogy. So I remember sitting down with David Finterman, because I met him for like a lunch before I went to Star Wars Celebration Anaheim, because I was going to be doing some battle stuff with that, and kind of really kind of laid this out for him and said, I think Beaumont Kin is the key to this. And he was like, I agree. I also now think that Beaumont Kin is the key to this. So I've become quite protective of Beaumont Kin and quite fond of him. I only realised yesterday they haven't done like an action figure of him, and that really upsets me, because I feel like I deserve a little Black Series Beaumont Kin who can sit on my desk and judge me for the horrible things that I did to him. But he's my guy now. He's my little space historian.
I love it.
Beaumont was a character when I first saw him in the film. I was like, oh, get a load of this guy. He's just filled with facts. And now that I've read this book, and I say that as a nerd myself, right? But now that I've read this book and I'm kind of recontextualizing him as a character, I'm like, wow, he's doing like such a noble deed and a noble mission here to say like, hey, these things over the course of history haven't happened in isolation. Like, if we're going to say, we beat the Empire, now we beat the First Order, and we're going to actually say like, never let this happen again. Like, we have to mean it. Yeah. And we need to make sure never again, like it never happens again. And so like, I really think of now this text and his mission is to say like, here are all the things that we need to do to prevent that from happening ever again. Not that it's, for certain with 100% guarantee will never happen again, but like, here are some of the things that we can do in our everyday life that might mitigate it or mitigate the severity of it if it ever does come back into the picture. Because we know Star War, it's a Star War, not Star Peace.
Yes.
So ultimately, history will repeat itself at some point.
Yeah, but, Beaumont Kin is clearly saying that, fighting the Empire isn't a spectator sport. It's an active thing. You have to do something. It's not enough to just sit there and hope. And I think because of the staggering level of freedom that Lucasfilm and trust that Lucasfilm gave to me for this, we ended up with a situation where we've probably created more of a kind of a persona and a background around Beaumont Kin than has necessarily happened in a single book for like what is effectively a background character. Before we know so much more about Beaumont Kin now without necessarily digging into his, like his CV or his kind of family history. Bits of that come out in one of the graphic novels, but about who he is, where he is, kind of emotionally, mentally at the end of the sequel trilogy was. I only kind of really appreciate that a little bit now that the writing's done, that we have filled in so much of Beaumont Kin's current, present character. I say present with speech marks because firstly it's in the past, and also Star Wars time is random, it fluctuates. But yeah, about what he's feeling at the end of the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
I think it also works to give a lot of context to, the Resistance as a whole. If you have someone like that in that space who is, on the front lines of this resistance at this crucial moment, he kind of sets the tone for imagining the people around him as well when you go back and you watch the film, which I think is really compelling. To think about it, considering he is such a blank slate character kind of in the film itself. And I always appreciate a recontextualization of a character or a movie or a world or whatever that allows me to think about that in a different way. And I think that's, Star Wars' great character, its core thing is that every time we do another one of these, we get to look back in a way that we didn't before have.
Yeah.
That wasn't, see, now it's me not doing the sentences.
One of the things that they always, it's not like explicitly said to you when you're kind of working on a book like this, but it's kind of, the readers understand it, the writers understand it, everybody understands it, is that the purpose of these books isn't to change what you see on the screen, it's to enhance it. It's to make you look at it again and maybe get something different out of it, because they're not going to hire me to write like, okay, Chris, we want you to do 120,000 words to dramatically change The Empire Strikes Back. I don't think people are going to want that or like that, and therefore I don't think they're going to like me. So instead, what the aim is to kind of colour in some of the gaps to add more to what you see on the screen. And at some point, because I haven't done it since I finished writing the book, I'd be quite tempted to go back and watch The Rise of Skywalker again and just watch it for Beaumont Kin and see, because I watched like lots of little snippets of him to try and get even some of like his speech patterns and try and translate that a little bit into the text format, but just to watch it again and see if I get anything else out of it now that he has written his book.
Now that he has done all this work in the aftermath of it all. Talking about the history and these gaps and things, you had to do a lot of research in your writing as a historian and as a fictional historian. And what was your research process like for this book, compared to your real life history work and to, Battles That Changed the Galaxy, which is another feat in itself if we're talking about awesome mega Star Wars books?
So it feels a little bit like cheating to an extent, in the when I'm writing like normal, I don't know, First World War history book, and I'm writing it and I'm putting stuff in footnotes, annoyingly I have to read those things that go in the footnotes. I know, gross, and like incredibly unfair. Like, I actually have to do the reading and do the research.
Tedious.
To an extent, when constructing some of this stuff, it doesn't exist. I don't have to read it. All I have to do is decide what it says in my head and then write it in a manner that gives you a sense of what it says. But the writing of this was actually, or the research for this was hugely collaborative. So one of the things I think can be quite easy for people to do, and God knows I've done it as well, is you pick up a Star Wars book and you go, okay, that's got, so, Dr. Chris Kempshall on the cover, therefore Dr. Chris Kempshall wrote this. And it's true, but it's not accurate, because, I worked hugely closely with David Fenterman at DK, and the amount of heavy lifting that Story Group at Lucasfilm were doing was incredible. because every month I'd be writing 4 or 5 4,000-word chapters. And I'd send them off at the end of the month. But on the way back, as they kind of passed each other in internet space, was a bunch of questions for the next 4 or 5 chapters that I'd sent off a month previously. And it would be like, I need details of some Imperial pilots or some Imperial atrocities, or I need some worlds with mines on them. And some of it, they must have been looking at going, right, why does he care? Why does anybody care about what is this random stream of nonsense that's kind of landing in my inbox directly from the UK? But because they had all of this information, and this is what Story Group does, it maintains kind of equilibrium and it maintains kind of continuity. They were able to kind of provide me with like the raw data that I needed to then go, okay, this is what I want to do with X and this is what I want to do with Y. And sometimes it would be a case of, so around about this time last year, actually it was about a month ago last year, I was in Canada for a First World War conference. And then at the end of that conference, everybody else went home and I disappeared for 4 days or 5 days. And there's no trace on the internet at the time of where I went. And I went to San Francisco to meet with Lucasfilm and sit down with some of the Story Group and talk through some of the major things that we were wanting to do. And some of those things will be like, okay, I'm looking for like an atrocity. And they'll go, well, this has been mentioned and we've never established what happens there. So be our guest. And that level of freedom for the research is great. Everything I need to know, I could watch on whatever TV show or film that it's mentioned in or book that it's mentioned in. So being able to work with them made it possible, because without that kind of constant stream of Star Wars lore coming back down the road to you, it's just not a reasonable task for anybody to undertake. And you'll just end up getting any number of things wrong, because there will be a graphic novel that was published randomly in 2002 that changes somebody's eye color, or now they're left-handed and the whole thing starts to come apart at the seams.
Right.
How dare you destroy the lore?
I know.
You changed the eye color.
I'll wait for the emails to start arriving. But for Battles That Changed the Galaxy, because I was writing that as part of a team alongside Amy Radcliffe, Jason Fry and Cole Horton, all of whom are like established Star Wars people, far more established Star Wars people than I am. It was different. I mean, firstly, because it was a new one, and I really didn't want to screw it up. I've said to people, like, the sentence, wow, this reads like a historian read it. The tone in which that sentence is delivered dramatically changes whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
I wanted the good version of, wow, this reads like a historian read it, rather than, wow, this reads like a historian wrote it. But the other 75% of the book's great. So I was kind of in contact with them, and questions went via DK up through up to Lucasfilm, and bits and pieces from Story Group came back down. So a lot of the research for that was like watching episodes of the Rebels, or watching episodes of the Clone Wars, or watching one of the films for that battle sequence to then figure out what's actually happening on screen. Rise and Fall was a far more solo thing for the actual typing, but collaborative thing for the creation of information.
Yeah, I can't even begin to just imagine like how your mind is working throughout this process, because one thing that I find fascinating with this book is, again, you're approaching it through the eyes of Beaumont Kin, so you have to separate yourself, Chris, the Star Wars fan who has seen the Star War and knows the Star War, versus Beaumont Kin, who does not know he is in the Star War, nor does he know that you have watched the prequel trilogy and you know how the Empire rose, right? So in your mind, when you're kind of creating like a meta text of this, I wouldn't call him an unreliable narrator, but a narrator that's putting together the puzzle and trying to put together the puzzle to the best of his ability with the information he has available. What were some of the most fun and challenging aspects of being on the outside of the Star Wars timeline, but trying to look in and fill those shoes?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because you're right. We cheated. We watched Star Wars, and it turns out watching Star Wars helps give you a real good understanding of what happens in Star Wars. Beaumont Kin, alas, has not watched Star Wars, and he doesn't have a DVD player, so I couldn't loan him my
Darn.
copies. There's no digital download on Exegol.
Imagine if there was.
God, yeah, I don't want to see Palpatine's browsing history. I think that would be horrendous. The thing with then for trying to manage that with Beaumont is trying, because there are moments in the book where, if you've watched Star Wars, you can look at it and go, that's not what happened, Beaumont. But if you were to take, firstly, take the watching of Star Wars out of the equation, and then maybe take a piece of evidence that probably wouldn't survive for 30 years out of the equation as well, what you're left with is what Beaumont Kin is working with. So what conclusions would you therefore make if these were the only two things that you had to try and understand a thing? And trying to make that balance so that the reader does get a sense of, if I only knew this, maybe I'd come to a similar conclusion, maybe not identical conclusion, but maybe that's what I'd think had happened as well, because Beaumont doesn't have all of this extra information. He doesn't have Story Group pulling it all down for him. And the like. So trying to create a plausible series of breadcrumbs from Beaumont Kin not necessarily being right or wrong, but not quite accurate in his understanding of things, and then tracing that back to the things that survived, deciding what moments in Star Wars would exist still in an archive. Because, you might think, oh, wow, if he just needs to watch that conversation between Palpatine and Vader in Empire Strikes Back about Luke Skywalker still being alive, and that'll clear everything up. So no one's recording that. I mean, if you're recording that, you're going to die. At least one of those people is going to kill you. There's no way that recording or that conversation is going to exist in an archive somewhere in 30 years' time. So all of that stuff has to go. So what might survive for 30, 40 or so years to exist so that Beaumont Kin could draw upon a fraction of it was a real challenge, but also a really fun thing of kind of reconsidering Star Wars as kind of the prologue to a series of archives of, what of this stuff that we see on screen would even get remotely close to getting written down or surviving in some form of testimony that might then become useful later on. That was probably the best bit, but also, probably one of the most kind of challenging aspects of it as well.
I feel like I do this just as a person. I'm like, this is going to be a big historical moment. We're all going to remember this thing. And then a few years later, I'm like, man, that barely even made a social media presence beyond my little realm. There's no way that this is getting noted in the historical record and not the mainstream one. But that's kind of, what makes the experience interesting, both about reading this book and about living as a person in the world, because you never know, everything. We look back and we'll figure out what people are saying about this moment right now. But what makes it really fun is that archive that, considering what have survived 30, 40 years through all of this turmoil in the galaxy, we do have the opportunity to get some fun in-universe citations that I'm a big fan of. And I would just love to know more about, this particular, how you crafted these, and if there was any official lore that you used to create these, and if you, or if you were just at the computer and file 200 million, that's what we're going with.
So, I mean, you're right. Footnotes are where the joy live. Everybody loves
That's
footnotes.
Right. But hey, when you get to make up footnotes, when you're not, having to truly read the text, properly cite the text, et cetera, I feel like there's a little more joy in the footnote when you just kind of get to fluff.
Yeah, there is. And there's also the opportunity. There's a bit of dark humor and a bit of kind of pulpy stuff in some of the other existing books and studies at Beaumont Kin are some of them are quite pulpy, which I felt quite Star Warsy. And some of the footnote kind of references are both, incredibly dark, but also kind of darkly funny as well when I was writing them. But the original kind of thought process was effectively tying into what we were just saying. How does Beaumont Kin know the things that Beaumont Kin knows? And for a while, we were doing stuff like, Luke Skywalker said after seeing Palpatine at Endor, XYZ. But there's only so many times you can do that in the body of the text. And it was very quickly getting to the point of like, I hate this. I don't like this system that I'm doing at all. So I kind of emailed David at DK and said, I think, and this isn't just because I'm a historian, so bear with me, but I think the solution to this problem is footnotes. We really, really lean into it because firstly, it'll give it a whole kind of veneer feeling of being like a history book because it's got footnotes and history books have footnotes. But also it will allow us to construct a whole world of evidence around Beaumont Kin. And firstly, it's going to let him show how diligent he's been in his research, which I think is a good thing, but also create this or help this lived-in feeling of the galaxy, which has always been a thing that I've liked about Star Wars. It's a populated, living, breathing universe. And I put together like 3 or 4 different structures of footnotes for this. And after I did like 2 or 3 chapters, I ended up changing it to a different structure of footnotes. So I had to go back and fix them all. And Lucasfilm were fine with it. I don't think anything ever really came up from Lucasfilm for it. One of the things that we started doing was adding in extra like numbers and letters. So it became, instead of just becoming random file, it became file 1074A or something like that to make these archives seem even bigger than they already were. But my ongoing, like, super annoyed, like, burning in my atoms annoyance is I didn't name the reference system. Now I have thought of names for the reference system, but until I talked to Lucasfilm to then retroactively name it, it just exists as this thing where it could be Space Chicago 18th or something like that as a reference system. So I'd like to, in some point in the future, I'd like to talk to Lucasfilm about having this reference system named, because again, that kind of, it adds something to the feeling that this is a real academic world that Beaumont is living in. There are names for these things. He's not just putting a bunch of words down in a footnote, and that's just how he's done it.
I love that as well. As a fan of like higher institutes of higher, specifically whenever there's an institute of higher learning, a university or what have you in a Star Wars, I'm like, haha. I'm a big fan of, for instance, Alexander Freed's The Institute of Quantitative Studies at Bothawui in the Alphabet Squadron series. That's I don't know. So yeah, having more oomph to like the academic rigor within the galaxy, I guess, is something that it's like one of those glub shittos that just really delights me. So I hope that you have the opportunity to give your reference system an official name in the future. I for one will be the thing that's like, this is my thing.
Yeah, and now it ends up feeling like I think Beaumont Kin might be a better historian than I am, because he does this so much better than I do in my normal work. He's so much more diligent. He does his referencing better. It's like, oh, come on, man. You're making me look bad.
You can't compare yourself to a fictional character.
I can't compare myself to Beaumont Kin.
That's not a standard that any of us can hold ourselves to.
No, it can't.
You're going to call Lucasfilm and be like, sorry, Chris, we booked your next gig with Beaumont. You're like, he's not even real.
Yeah.
Come on.
Also, he's quite profoundly psychologically damaged, so I reckon we should give him a rest.
He's been through too many wars, won too many wars. I will say, like, in addition to the footnotes too, I loved, one of my favorite parts of this book as a reader was getting to the picture section, and I was like, oh, Chris took it the extra mile, and even the pictures are like, this picture was taken here. Like, my favorite as an Andor fan was the picture of the ISB meeting, and it was like, oh, I know seeing Andor who took that photo. Of course, it's the guy that Luthen talks to in the elevators, the infamous elevator scene. And I also loved, I think at one point too, I think it was a footnote, but also within the text was a reference to Kristen Baver's Skywalker, A Family at War. So that was like even more meta of, your historical in-universe book referencing another historical in-universe reference book by another Star Wars author. Like I really love that call out as well.
There's I mean, Kristen Baver is the most wonderful person I think you'll ever meet. She is so kind and so generous with her time and her support. But Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire wouldn't exist without Skywalker Family at War, because it provided us with the precedent to take the next step further with it. Because, you know, her book is written in a kind of in-universe biography, but with a kind of an unknown, all-seeing kind of narrator, to then for us to take the next step and go, okay, we're going to make this a very specific narrator. But so many times during the writing of Rise and Fall, we go, okay, we need to figure out how to do X. What happened? How did Kristen Baver and the like do it in Skywalker Family of War? Can we draw anything from her kind of her version? So it felt, whilst, you know, there's no way of confirming that Kitrin Braves and Kristen Baver are the same person, it turns out, you know, there is somebody doing something very similar to her in the Star Wars universe, and that makes me happy. There's also references to something in there, to a study, it comes up a couple of times, that may or may not be Battles That Changed the Galaxy in there as well. Some of Beaumont's colleagues are doing a military history of the wars of the Empire and the like, which means that he doesn't have to.
Just like good and bad, you know. Where's his next book gonna come from? But yeah, I loved all of that stuff. It's just so delightful to see all the connections weave in and out of our real world and of the Star Wars universe that we get to play in. And as a Star Wars fan, were there any, you know, moments within the timeline that you were particularly excited to add to this narrative of Beaumont's?
So there's a few like little odd ones. I've always really liked going all the way back to kind of references in like the Rogue Squadron books and novels. I always really liked the Battle of Dera 4, which was from the Empire Strikes Back radio audio. So being able to, that briefly came up in Battles That Changed the Galaxy, but it wasn't in one of the sections that I wrote that Dera 4 happened. So being able to flesh it out a little bit more in Rise and Fall in a way that, if you know what happened, particularly from the Rogue Squadron graphic novels, what happened in the old legends at Dera 4, the version that now exists in the current canon is close enough to be like, okay, yeah, I get it, but still different enough to kind of exist on its own merits. So I was really excited that they let me do that. But the two biggies for me were probably the kind of re-evaluation of the Battle of Hoth in the chapter on that battle, and Beaumont Kin trying to figure out what happened in the briefing for the Empire's fleet at Endor. Firstly, because those were two things that, approaching as a historian, he's like, these are the types of things I would expect there to potentially exist in given the circumstances as I know. But it was also important for me, for Beaumont Kin, to show the audience what a historian does. It's like, there's no way of knowing for certain what actually is happening here, but here's a bunch of evidence, and some of it really massively contradicts each other. So we're going to have to weigh it up. And at the end of weighing up of those things, you do get a sense of what Beaumont Kin believes to be the truth. But it's also left open enough for the reader to go, no, I don't buy it. You know, I don't think that this briefing happened in this way, or I don't think that the Battle of Hoth resulted in these problems for the Empire. And those were two of the things that I talked about in person with Lucasfilm in San Francisco, because they were the things I really wanted to sit down and properly explain my kind of thought process for them. So the fact that they then let me do it and put it in the book was really cool. But those were the big ones for me. When I was sketching it out, along with, you know, wanting to kind of give like a full reckoning of like the horrors of Imperial genocide and like, I wanted to take those established moments and go, but what does this mean? If you lived in this universe, if you existed within the Imperial fleet, what would this mean to your morale, to your day-to-day life? Those were things I was really keen on.
Yeah. No, I'm also a huge Hoth fan, so that chapter in particular I enjoyed, because I feel like that's such a pivotal point in the Galactic War. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, like in Alexander Freed's Battlefront book 2, that's one of my favorites because that's such a centerpiece of that story. So I think getting to see Beaumont, as much as Beaumont's a historian, he's also somewhat of like a scientist in the way that he is coming up with hypotheses and providing specific evidence, and then either confirm or not like confirming, but like really running with those, and like leaving it open to interpretation as well, because he omits some things just from gaps in his knowledge, and other things like he just has to like go with what his gut tells him and what the evidence best points to. But like, again, we don't know for certain, and I think that's what makes the book so interesting. It's not just a lore dump; it is like a evidential trial and error, and let's just put the puzzle together as best as we can. And that's what makes it rewarding.
Yeah, and see if it actually looks like anything on the box.
Right.
Totally. On that note, we always ask the questions of people. It's like, oh, if you could talk to anybody who is dead, like a historical figure that's died, like who would you want to talk to, right? And so I would love to know for Beaumont Kin, if he could talk to any maybe living or dead character in the Star Wars universe, go right to the direct source, get those facts, get those perspectives, get rid of any omissions, and tell it straight up how it is. Who do you think he would choose, and why?
So, the obvious thought process go, he could sit down with with Palpatine. I think that would be a horrendous decision, and he absolutely should not do it. But as a sense of trying to gauge like Palpatine's mindset. But I actually think that what would be best for Beaumont Kin in regards to being a historian, writing history, but also for Beaumont Kin on an emotional level, because of how important Beaumont Kin is and his emotions as becomes clear as the book is going through. I think he needs to sit down and talk to Mon Mothma. I think he would greatly benefit from sitting down and talking to Mon Mothma, partly for getting an understanding of what it was like when the Empire appeared, and all the things of working in the Senate, and the realization that this is not going to be solved peacefully through votes and the like. It is going to be an armed rebellion. And all of those things would be super useful for him as a historian. But there's also a part in the book where Beaumont Kin is effectively writing that he just doesn't know how Mon Mothma and Princess Leia did this. How did they stop feeling this awful all the time, and so angry, and so kind of desiring of some form of revenge? How did they put all of that to one side and then go, actually what the galaxy needs is X, is truth and reconciliation, is peace, is a new start, a new beginning. And I think that would be good. I think Beaumont Kin needs that. He needs someone to explain to him how he can stop feeling like this, because it's, as it becomes, particularly in the latter stages of the book, it becomes clear quite the extent that Beaumont Kin is not all right, and it is eating him up inside because he feels this way and he doesn't want to feel this way. I think Mon Mothma would help Beaumont Kin. I mean, I love Mon Mothma. Looking at some of the decisions of the New Republic,
I mean, yeah. Also, yes. These things both exist in of equal weight in my mind. Yes. How excited are you for The Mask of Fear by Alexander Freed? Because
please,
me too.
There was for a very brief time, because I've actually only just got back from another conference in Canada again. For a brief time, it looked like I might be able to go to New York Comic Con, and then it just wasn't going to happen for a number of reasons, which meant I missed out on going to New York Comic Con, and I missed out on getting an early copy of
Us too.
Fear.
It's okay. Well, we're going to get through it together, and then soon it will be February, and then we will all have this book in our hands, delighting in Mon Mothma's fascinating choices and just her kind of incredible presence all at the same time. Yeah. I mean, this is our final question. Not the Mon Mothma Mask of Fear question, but that's always on my mind. But the real question is, at the end of the day, what does Star Wars mean to you? I know it's like the biggest, toughest, most open-ended question at the end.
It is the biggest, toughest, most open-ended question at the end. So I started my PhD in 2008, and I finished my PhD in 2013, and it's 2024 now. So I have been trying to be a historian for 16 years, or I've been a historian for 16 years in various forms. I've wanted to write Star Wars stuff since I was like 15 years old. So it predates the most important career choices of my life. I don't remember a time, as I said earlier, without Star Wars. But I also remember that when I was younger, whenever like autumn, winter rolled around, all of my friends would know that the temperature had changed because I'd disappear for 3 weeks because my asthma had massively flared up and I was basically lying in bed, surrounded by like as much menthol as you can, healthily expose a human being to. And I would lie in bed for days on end and I'd read Star Wars books because they made me happy and they were what I found interesting. And I'd play Star Wars games, and Star Wars Galaxies is probably the most important computer game I've ever played, and probably, again, because I'm sat here talking to you now, the most important thing career-wise in that sense that has ever happened to me. So just as a fan, I mean, Star Wars is hugely, hugely important to me. It's like an ever-present in my life since 1997. And I suspect there are some of your listeners who weren't born in 1997, which is
do we have, wow, that's actually, yeah, probably, but like, whoa.
Yeah, I'm just gonna quickly turn to dust. But the fact that I now have been able to do something or do two in-universe Star Wars things is ridiculous. There is no logical route from First World War historian to now. The series of events that actually happened is far more ridiculous than I actually kind of fully explained earlier on. And it would take a while. It involved, to give you a cut down version, basically somebody saw a random tweet from a British archive about me doing my research, and that's what flagged me up to DK, and they emailed me to say, would you like to do this? And all of that was in like the midst of a pandemic and missed deadlines for other bits and pieces. So there is no reasonable reason why I should be sit here doing this with you now. And the fact that I am makes me overwhelmingly incredibly happy. So that's what Star Wars means to me.
I love that. I love that so much. And, we're happy you're here too. And
oh, thank you.
I can't wait to put the next Chris Kempshall book on my shelf. So, fingers crossed. And, when you get your next project, and I'm saying when, because we're all manifesting here.
Yeah.
We'll have you back here on the show to talk about it. So
I certainly hope there'll be more. DK and Lucasfilm seem pleased with how it's gone. So I can ask for no more than that. So
yeah.
Hopefully they'll let me do some more.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for all your time today. It's honestly such a pleasure. And I know we're many months past the release, but again, getting to, we're thankful for this book in the spirit of Thanksgiving season. So again, thank you for your time. Where can our listeners find you online? And is there any work that you have coming up that you can talk about and want to give a shout to for our listeners to be on the lookout for?
So I'm on like most social media platforms since Twitter fractured into 1,000 pieces. So the benefit of being the only Chris Kempshall who's ever existed means I'm at Chris Kempshall on Twitter, I'm at Chris Kempshall on Instagram, I'm at Chris Kempshall on Threads, I'm at Chris Kempshall on Blue Sky. All of those, and you'll find me kind of talking about various bits and pieces there. I have to get into the habit of saying that I also have a history podcast that I do with some friends of mine, because if I don't mention it, at some point they're just going to be like, what good are you, Chris, if you're not actually going to plug this stuff when you're talking to people. So if any of your listeners have like an interest in the First World War and how it's portrayed in popular culture, there's a podcast I do with some academic friends of mine called Oh, What a Lovely Podcast, which kind of examines how the First World War appears in film or novels or computer games and things like that, which is a lot of fun. I'm trying to think. I don't have anything massively on the horizon. Me and a friend have got an academic article about a First World War game about Italy coming out in just over a week's time. So again, if you've got like a burning desire to read about First World War games about Italy, I imagine there, probably maybe like 2 or 3 people in the world.
Hey, there's an audience for everything. Somewhere.
There is an audience for everything. I imagine I'll be sharing that. That's actually going to be open access, free to read, so anybody can read that. You don't have to worry about like paying something, because God knows nobody needs that. Pay money to read an article on the internet. I imagine I'll share that on any of the 10,000 social media platforms that will exist within a week's time.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We look forward to it. I need to brush up on my First World War history, so maybe I need to take a listen and do some more digging.
I can recommend you at least several very lengthy books about the First World War, who were written by Beaumont Kin's ghostwriter.
Yeah, I think I know a guy. So thank you once again, Chris. We're so happy to have you here. And until next time, may the force be with you.
And with you.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of Friends of the Force with Dr. Chris Kempshall. And once again, the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire is on bookshelves, and you should be adding it to your bookshelf locally in your room, in your office space, wherever you live. Put it on a bookshelf. Cherish it forever. It's a great book. As a reminder, follow us on all of our socials, including the latest of which is Blue Sky, where we're going to be primarily housed going forward and posting from. So can't say enough good things about Blue Sky. Vibes are good over there. Please join us. It's fantastic. And wherever you listen to the podcast, make sure you subscribe to the show to get all the latest episodes. We got some great book discussions coming up in the weeks ahead, so you don't want to miss those.
Absolutely. We have a Patreon where tiers start at $1. We're very, very grateful to our patrons who help keep the lights on at Friends of the Forest. They are Brian, Ben, Cheryl, Clay, Comet, David, Emma, Jennifer, Katie, Knights of Ren, Krista, Leanne, Logan, Lucy, Lindsay, Matthew, Nicole, Rob, Ruth, Santa, Skytalkers, Tom, Travis, and our newest patrons, Sophia and Julia. Thank you all very, very much for your support. We do appreciate it. And to everyone who listens. And Brad said, make sure to pick up Rise and Fall. But if you want the whole Chris Kempshall collection, you should get The History and Politics of Star Wars and Battles That Change the Galaxy, because they just give you everything, especially if you're a Star Wars politics lover like us. So that's my recommendation of the day, in addition to staying healthy, happy, and hydrated.
And full of turkey.
Yeah, or the leftover turkey.
Yeah.
Or whatever you enjoy on a Thanksgiving, or if for our non-Americans, your kind of early winter holidays, your late fall, early winter holidays.
My Thanksgiving experience is the rise, the fall, the rise, and the fall again onto the couch, and then the rise off the couch again and the rise. But every time I rise and fall, I'm getting more turkey. So anyways, we're going to end this episode. Thank you all for listening. See what I did there? Until next time, may the force be with you always.